Hello, everyone. This is Larry Ponemon, Ponemon Institute, and I'm here with Darren, and we're going to present our 2018 State of Cybersecurity in Small and Medium-Sized Businesses. We have a ton of material here to cover. All of it is going to be available to you, so you don't have to take copious notes or do any of that good stuff. And we'll basically try to get through about, maybe over 45 or 50 minutes, giving us maybe 10 minutes or so for Q&A. So if write down those good questions, and hopefully we'll be able to get to you. I am the founder and chairman of Ponemon Institute, and Darren, of course, is the CEO and founder of Cybersecurity, a really wonderful company. We've had the opportunity to work as research partners for many years, or for at least a few years anyway. In terms of what I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk about the most salient findings of our recent study. I'll talk a little bit about our methods. I'll talk about trends in SMB cyber attacks and data breaches that we've captured. We'll talk a little bit about ransomware. It's still a pretty relevant topic. We're going to talk about cybersecurity posture and governance. Of course, we're going to cover password practices and policies. And then if we still have time, I'll cover very quickly the best practices of those high-performing companies. Darren, it might be a good idea if you can talk a little bit about what you're going to cover in your part of the presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Ponemon. So this is Darren Guccione. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cybersecurity. Once Dr. Ponemon finishes his coverage on the study, I'm going to talk about the key takeaways from the Cybersecurity SMB study, how you can protect your business at vulnerable entry points, some of the trends in SMB cyber attacks and data breaches, as well as evaluating password management solutions and some of the solutions to protect your business. And then we'll wrap up with hopefully a nice Q&A session.
Great. So a little bit about our study. Our focus is on SMBs, small to medium-sized businesses. And we know from research that these organizations are increasingly facing cybersecurity risks that larger companies face. Only 28% of companies in our study rate their ability to mitigate threats, vulnerabilities, and attacks as highly effective. In other words, 1 minus 28%, my math is correct, it's a pretty high percentage where companies do not necessarily think that they're at that level of efficiency and effectiveness. The goal of our study is primarily to track how smaller size organizations companies address the same threats faced by larger companies. And basically, we're looking at 2018, our current study, and we're going to compare it to our 2017 study as well. So with that being said, let's move to our next slide. Our company experienced a cyber attack and data breach the past 12 months. The answer to that, according to our study, 61% said yes to cyber attack and 67% said yes to cyber attack. So basically it has increased by 6%. You're probably wondering, is that statistically significant? And the answer is yes. It's about 4.5 percentage points of margin of error at the 95% level of confidence. So just keep that in mind. On the data breach side, we kind of get the same finding, right? 54% moving to 58%. Is that statistically significant? It's on the cusp. It's 4 percentage points. It's close to significant. Next slide. So our most salient findings, number one, and we're going to do a deeper dive, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on this slide, but phishing attacks and advanced malware / zero-day attacks are increasing. It's bad news. The risk of negligent employees and contractors causing a data breach or ransomware is getting worse. Boy, that's a problem. More companies are affected by exploits and malware that evaded their intrusion detection system. 72% of respondents on intrusion detection and 82% on antivirus. In other words, these tools are not giving you the necessary coverage that you need. Mobile devices are the most vulnerable endpoints or entry points to networks and enterprise systems, according to 55% of respondents. More companies have experienced ransomware attacks this year, 61% of respondents versus only 52% in 2017. And 70% of respondents, these companies report the ransom was paid. Okay, it's a mouthful, a lot of stuff here. Continuing with most salient findings, to strengthen their cybersecurity posture, companies need more in-house expertise and budget. And we see that in a number of Ponemon studies, so this is internally consistent with other studies that we do. Responsibility for determining IT security priorities is dispersed throughout the company, so it's not necessarily centralized in the SMB, as you might find in larger organizations. Passwords are often compromised or stolen because employees use weak passwords. Obviously, Darren will talk a little bit about talk a little bit about Keeper and the need for the better tools, better controls over passwords. We'll get into that. And then a lack of visibility into employees' password practices, exacerbating the likelihood of attacks. Finally, more companies are using single sign-on SSO to simplify and increase the security of user access to their company's applications and data. So these are all the different things that we're going to talk about over the next, say, 30 to 40 minutes. Next slide. Methods. It's kind of scary. Methodology. If you're a researcher, this is actually one of the most important pieces of information. How large is the sample and is it representative of the underlying population, right? Those are the big questions. And what we find in this study, which is done in the US and the UK, we have a very large sample of 1,045 qualified respondents, which is just slightly more than last year's study. The response rate is 3.6%. Now, if you know something about research, a response rate when the subject is an expert, like as in this study, anything greater than 2.5% is considered fantastic. 3.6% is really fantastic. It's a great result, and it means that people found the research interesting. But obviously, 3.6% is not 100%, and there's a possibility, as we'll talk about later, of a non-response bias. But we talk a little bit about how we control that as well. It's not the end of the world if you have it. Next slide. Okay, so the distribution of respondents according to position level, we cast a really wide net. We have business owners, C-level executives, vice presidents, directors, and so on. If you kind of look at those folks who are in supervisory positions and above, it's well more than half the sample, which means it's an experienced sample. But we also have people who rank and file, like staff technicians, administrative, and so on. These people, because they're in the trenches, might know more about what's the real issues going on from the security and data protection perspective than people who are more senior. We see that consistently, but in the SMB, there's fewer people and there's more knowledge, if you will, across different individuals and different departments in the company. So this is one area where smaller companies can actually have an advantage over larger companies. Next slide, please. Now the chain of command of the people who are responding to the study. The largest slice of the pie at 23% is the CIO or head of corporate IT, followed by the COO or head of operations, followed by the business unit leader or general manager of the business unit, followed by the business owner / board of directors, and you can kind of see the rest. The key variable here is, we really like looking at the results from a number of different vantage points. And one of the important issues is if you're located in IT versus non-IT, there are differences in the way people respond to these questions. And also differences in the level of knowledge that individuals have about security exploits, data breaches, and so on. Next slide, please. So this is an important slide because we want to cover as many industries as possible. That means that our sample is representative of the underlying population that we're attempting to study, right? That's really important stuff. The bad news is some of the slices of the pie, even with an enormous sample as we have here, these percentages make it very difficult to do a carve out on certain industries like education, communications, pharmaceutical, and so on. But the big ones like retail services, retailing, financial services, industrial / manufacturing, public sector, which is primarily government, we basically have enough people, if you will, respondents to do carve out. I think we find that there is some correlation based on industry. Okay, next slide. So now we're going to talk about some of the results. Now we're getting into the interesting stuff. This is trends in SMB cyber attacks and data breaches over the last couple of years. We try to stay consistent, make it easier. It's a very patriotic looking slide, white background, red, white, and blue, but we basically have the 2017 results represented in red, and the blue is 2018, and that's pretty consistent. There may be one or two exceptions to that rule, but for the rest of the presentation, that's our color code. What types of attacks did the organization experience? Clearly, if you add up all of these numbers, right, it's more than 100%, and the reason for that is you can select more than one type of attack that you actually experience. Number one, phishing and social engineering, very popular. Web-based attack. Number two, general malware, compromised stolen devices, denial of service, big deal here. Advanced malware, zero-day attacks, SQL injection, malicious insiders, cross-site scripting, and there are others. The key here is that phishing and social engineering is a huge issue for big companies, for small companies, for medium-sized companies. It really has a huge impact on lots of organizations, and you kind of need to be aware of that. Web-based attacks, obviously you notice that every one of these blue lines is increasing, at least to advanced malware. So it's not huge differences, but if you look at the pattern, things are actually getting worse and not getting better in terms of frequency. Okay, next slide, please. So what was the root cause of the data breach your business experienced? And you can, again, have more than one choice. The number one factor is not the glamorous bad guy attacker, huge security brain breaking into, government organizations like the CIA or whatever. It's not that. It's really the negligent employee or contractor. And we know that, for example, phishing scams, why do they happen? In many cases, because the employee just is not paying attention to the details, or they don't really understand it well enough to be able to change their behavior. So negligent employees or contractor, big problem. And notice that's getting worse. Third-party mistakes hasn't changed, but again, that's a second choice. External hacker attacks at 33, it grows to 37%. Error in system or operating process, otherwise known as a system glitch. This is getting a little better, from 34 down to 30%. Malicious insider hasn't changed. And the don't know response is not a good response because the people who are responding should know. But again, that's hovering at about 31, 32%, not significantly different. Okay, a lot of stuff going on here. Next slide. So what types of information are you most concerned about protecting from cyber attackers, according to respondents? Number one, customer records, followed by intellectual property, followed by customer credit or debit card information, followed by financial information, and employee records, business correspondence, and others. Notice that many of the data breaches we worry about from a privacy and data protection perspective would be the customer record. Somehow it's considered the most important. It generates monetary value if it's protected, but intellectual property, trade secrets and so on, is basically up and coming. A lot of bad guys find that information, small amounts of high value data, it's easier to exploit, and if in the wrong hands, can be very dangerous, and small fortunes are paid on extortion. So those are issues that are changing, if you will, in the landscape, both for larger organizations and smaller size companies. Okay, next slide. This is perceptions about cyber attacks against their companies, and the measure that we're using here is their agreement scale, from strongly agree to strongly disagree. It's called an objective scale, and when you take the agreement and strong agreement, that is kind of suggesting that the statement being provided is truthful. And if it's minus the agreement or the disagreement side of the scale, you basically are saying that statement that's being made you don't agree with, or it's not true for you, the respondent. Okay, let me explain how it's going to work. Cyber attacks are becoming more targeted. 62% believe that's true. It was 60% when we did the study last year in 2017. Cyber attacks experience becoming more severe in terms of negative consequences, such as financial impact. 60% versus 59% hasn't changed that much, and these percentages are very high. Cyber attacks are becoming more sophisticated. 59 and 59% hasn't changed. Still very high percentage. So if things aren't getting worse, they're certainly not getting better, and that's what we learned from this slide. Next slide, please. Okay, another bar chart. Has your business experienced situations when exploits and malware have invaded their intrusion detection system or antivirus solution? And when we say has evaded, it doesn't have to be a large number. It could be one, a small number, but the fact that it can happen is dangerous. It's a potential signal that you have a real problem on your hands. And so what we basically see on the antivirus side, it was 81% said yes to that question versus 82% this year. Hasn't changed. 66% intrusion detection, it got worse to 72%. Remember, the margin of error is 4.5%, and that is clearly, in the 6% range. So that is statistically significant. Okay, next slide. So what are the most vulnerable endpoints or entry points to your organization's networks and enterprise systems? The number one, mobile devices. And again, it hasn't changed that much, 55, 56%. It's roughly the same ballpark. Laptops, that has changed. It basically went from 43 to 49%. So actually things are getting worse in that space, but it's close to the cusp of the margin of error. Then cloud systems at 42% versus 38%. Internet server, 42 versus 36%. Now, the new addition to this list, so that's why you kind of have this gap here, but IoT devices at 41%, smartphones at 40 versus 39%, and you can see the rest. Then we get to smaller percentages. So clearly the devices you have to worry about mostly would be mobile devices, laptops, cloud, and I would actually put IoT up there on the list because it may be a low percentage relative to the others at 41%, but it is definitely growing. And we see evidence of that in other Ponemon studies. So pay attention to those IoT devices. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, how does the use of mobile devices to access business critical applications and IT infrastructure affect your organization's security posture? So the scale is, it improves security posture, diminishes security posture, no effect on security posture, cannot determine. Improving security posture, which, you know, it wouldn't make sense to basically say anything is improving given the question, but it's only covering at 6%. Diminishing security posture is almost half in both last year and this year, 48 and 49%. No effect on security posture at only 35 and 33%, and cannot determine. These are the folks that, there's always people kind of, doing surveys and they're unsure or they can't determine something, and so they kind of fill it out that way. Kind of is a pattern that you see in the way people complete surveys. That's another story. Okay, so anyway, this tells us that things are this diminishing and not increasing security postures. Thank you. Next slide. So now changing gears a little bit, we're going to talk about ransomware, which we started to look at pretty closely starting last year. So ransomware attacks continue to increase. It's kind of depressing, of course, because they can be very costly. Next slide. So again, this is that strongly agree response, that objective scale we talked about before. And this is, again, around that negligent employee issue we talked about. Negligent employees put our company at risk for a ransomware attack. 61% this year believe that to be true. A ransomware attack would have serious financial consequences to our company. 56% this year versus 58%, went down a little. My company believes it is too small to be the target of ransomware. 54% believe that's true versus 51%. My company would never pay ransomware even if we lost the data. 51% said that to be true versus 49%, again, just about half. And we are confident that our current antivirus software will protect our company from ransomware. 48 and 48% believe that to be true. So one minus that, which is 52%, do not believe that to be true. Okay, a lot of stuff here. Next slide. So how is the ransomware unleashed? And basically, the typical number one way of doing it is phishing and social engineering. The number two category is spoof websites. So instead of a URL that you're clicking on, it's an attachment to like an email. This would also be malvertisements and social media and others. But clearly, your hands down winner, or I should say winner, but I mean, the most likely venue is phishing and social engineering. Next slide. What types of devices were compromised by ransomware? Number one, the overwhelming response is desktop and laptop, and mobile devices, servers, and others. Based on some of the evidence of our other Ponemon studies, we know that mobile is on the increase as a kind of a way of being compromised from ransomware and other extortion threats. Because ransomware is just one of many different types of extortion that bad guys bring to the table and can be very costly to companies. Let's go to our next slide. Why did your company not pay a ransom? We actually know that not all ransoms are paid. And I'm going to flip around here in my manual presentation, but again, I think more than half of their organization decided not to pay the ransomware. And the reason is, if you have a full and complete backup, you're in good shape. You have to know this. You just can't assume you have a full and complete backup. But if you do, God bless you, you're safe, right? That's 73% that could restore. But you did not believe the bad guys would provide the encryption, the cipher. And why would you want to believe the bad guy? And that's 49% believe that to be so. Company's policy is not to pay ransom no matter what. 32% believe that to be true. Compromised data was not critical for our company, only 20%, and law enforcement told us not to pay, and that's 10%. So, a whole bunch of reasons. The most important, of course, full and complete backup so you can restore with confidence. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about cybersecurity posture and governance in small to medium-sized businesses. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges that keep you up at night? Keep your IT security posture from being fully effective. We talked a little bit about it before, but I'll emphasize the fact that good security happens because you have good people, as well as the right technologies, the right governance and policies and protocols in place. It's not any one thing, it's the collection of all of these things working harmoniously. And so number one, insufficient personnel is a big problem recognized by our SMBs, followed by the lack of budget, followed by a lack of understanding about how to protect against cyber attacks, insufficient enabling security technologies, lack of in-house expertise. It's not a priority for senior executives and other in the C-level, lack of collaboration with other functions. Even in small and medium-sized companies, we see silos and turf issues that emerge in security, and that can be devastating to a company trying to achieve a stronger security posture. Lack of clear leadership, and management does not see the cyber attack as a significant risk. That's only 5 or 4%, just a negligible result. So number one, budget and people, okay, and understanding, a higher level of understanding. Okay, next slide. Does your organization have an adequate budget and in-house expertise to achieve a strong security posture? And we know that budget is normally not adequate. Most people would tell you that, even if it's kind of sort of adequate, but we basically find that 63% say that it's not adequate. And then in-house expertise, 62% say, they base it, 59%, I'm sorry, this year says, they say that they are not sure, or it's no, they don't necessarily have the in-house expertise that they believe is needed. Okay, next slide. A lot of numbers here, so hopefully, and as I said, all of it is in a research report, so you don't have to worry about taking notes, but some of these results, deserve a kind of a drill down, a deeper dive that we've done. Okay, who determines the IT security priorities in the SMB? The number one response, which is very troubling, of course, is no one function determines IT security posture priorities. And why that's a problem is if you don't have the buck stops here philosophy with security, things don't necessarily get done very well. So having no one function as your first choice is kind of not good, in my opinion. Followed by the CIO, or the corporate IT function, followed by the chief executive, followed by head of operations, business owners, lines of business. Even the board of directors get listed there, but only at 9%. So you notice that the general view is that we probably need to have greater leadership and ownership of security if you're going to get this done right. And the CIO is in second place. It might be, the ideal would be, having more senior level, C-level executives involved as well. Remember, in a small and medium-sized business, it's different than a large corporation. Where in a large company, Fortune 500 company, you're not going to necessarily have the CEO spending a lot of time on security. But in SMBs, you often do. People roll up their shirt sleeves and do these kinds of things. Okay, next slide. What services are provided by MSSPs to support your IT security posture? Managed security services, we're talking about here. And traditionally, it's usually about monitoring and managing firewalls or intrusion prevention systems, which are not working perfectly, because there was a previous slide on that. Then number two would be monitor to manage intrusion detection, manage or monitor security gateways for messaging or web traffic, manage vulnerability scanning of networks, servers, databases, and so on. If you kind of look at the list, it really hasn't changed all that much over the last couple of years. We have a couple of new items added, like identity and access management and privilege access management. But in general, things are staying pretty stable in terms of MSSPs. We do know that more MSSPs are providing not your traditional services, but things that are, more focused and related, customized, if you will, to the organization they serve. So there's more to it than just this one slide. This is just a long list, a laundry list, but the list is actually much longer if you wanted to figure out what services MSSPs provide. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, this is an important issue because it affects all organizations, including smaller size companies, well, like my company, Ponemon Institute. The GDPR, General Data Privacy Regulation, requires organizations to significantly change the way they collect and use data. And the data that is at risk, it would be data about European citizens. GDPR is a European Union requirement, But again, if you're a U.S. company and you have one or a very small number of European citizens in your database and you violate their privacy rights, you could be in a world of hurt. The fines can be millions, tens of millions, or even more than that if you're like a Google or Facebook. And so clearly the GDPR has caused a lot of smaller size organizations to implement policies and procedures that are consistent and change the way they do things. In fact, changing workflow can be a very important part of GDPR. So keep in mind that if you're not aware of GDPR, you need to learn about it. You can contact Ponemon Institute. We would share what we've done research on this, but it is not just a flood issue, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's a real problem for companies that are doing just even the small amounts of data collection in Europe or European citizens. Okay, and yes, significant change is increasing. It's viewed as even becoming harder to comply. In terms of IT security guidelines, this is one area where smaller size companies are different than larger companies, enterprise size companies. Clearly, the most popular in our sample is PCI DSS, which is the payment card industry, followed by SOX, then NIST, and SOC 2 or SOC 3, then COBIT, which has been around for ages, and then HIPAA, which again applies to health information, but a lot of companies have internal health-related information and pay. It's not just the provider; it's also the pay, the insurance company. So it's more than just healthcare organizations that have to comply with HIPAA. ISO, which has been around for ages, and then none of the above, which is a very troubling finding, but it's improving by a significant amount, from 41% to 31%. Okay, and kind of a little point here. It looks like there's a message, and I'm sorry, I can't read it. I need to get my reading glasses. Okay, now does your organization, speaking about visibility, does your organization have visibility into employees' password practices and the password policy? The responses are no and unsure response. And visibility into employees' password practices, 59% back in the day in 2017, down to 54%. Password policy from 57 down to 54%. Now again, statistically, it's marginally significant, but if you can see, these percentages are very high and really should be, in the 50% range or 60% range. Next slide. Is your company able to determine employee password practices and more than one choice is permitted? And there are 4 responses here. Making periodic changes to passwords, 47%. Using unique or strong passwords, 46%. The number of passwords each employee has, 46%. And sharing passwords with others. Now, notice how low that is at 24%. For ages, I've been in the security industry for, I hate to admit it, but like more than 45 years, and password sharing has been a problem from the very beginning. I mean, it's crazy, but it's still a big issue, and a lot of folks don't realize the implications of doing it, but it is definitely something that should be on your radar screen. Next slide. What does your company use to manage and protect its passwords? And there's a problem as you get older, by the way, human memory. Not being able to remember all your complex passwords. And, when you have like 8 or 9 or 10 or 11, various characters and special characters and uppercase, lowercase, it's very hard. Spreadsheets, again, if the spreadsheet is insecure, that could be a nightmare for you. Manually write it down and put it on sticky notes. Boy, oh Bob, that happens in lots of places. You have to be careful. Browser extension and others. So again, human memory being the most common way of dealing with managing your password, and it's very hard and probably not ideal. That's why you need to have Keeper. Okay, next slide. Okay, here we are. Good. What is your biggest pain point about employees and their passwords? The number one pain point at 68%, employee passwords being stolen or compromised. 67% employee using weak passwords. 58% time spent resetting passwords. That could be a problem and a social engineering nightmare for organizations. Changing passwords when an employee leaves his or her job at 46%. Employee adoption of best practices at only 38%. In other words, 62% means they're not attempting to adopt best practices, and that is very troubling. Next slide. Does your organization take any of the following steps to safeguard passwords? I'm only going to do a few of these, looking at the highest percentages. 46% provide an alternative to keyboard entry, such as voice recognition, other biometrics, and so on. Periodic password changes at 44%. Require more than one authentication system, such as two-factor at 40%. Monitor third-party sites when compromised passwords are shared, 40%. And then we go down to the other smaller percentages. Okay, next slide. Does single sign-on, abbreviated here by SSO, simplify and increase the security of user access to your organization's applications or data? The response is yes, right? 73% say yes this year, 69% last year, so it's marginally significant. No goes from 26% down to 22%, and the unsure stay at about the same level. Next slide, please. Small print warning. As you get older, you know, this is almost impossible to read. Okay, but I have my reading glasses, so I'm in good shape. Security technology is considered essential and very important, and more than one choice is allowed. Client firewall, look at all that. That's been around for ages as a primary security vehicle, and it still is. Followed by intrusion detection and prevention, followed by VPN and other secure web gateways. And number 4 is password protection and password management. Automated patch management, privileged user access management, identity and access management, anti-denial of attack services, DDoS, employee technology, encryption technology is still very important, web application firewalls, and you can see the rest. Pretty long list. But again, we asked respondents to list those that they felt were most important to their achieving a strong security posture. And what kind of rises to the top are traditional tools as well as some emerging tools. Like, for example, big data analytics is on the list at the low end, but I predict that that's going to increase at a significant rate over the next couple of years. And you can only do that if we continue to do this study, we will trend it. The tokenization, unified threat management, UTM, next generation firewalls, things that are at the bottom of the list are the emerging technologies. We're going to see more automation, managed machine learning, those kinds of things as well. So sit tight. Things are changing pretty quickly. Next slide. Now we're going to turn our attention to my favorite topic, best practices. What are the best practices of high-performing companies? Let's go to our next slide. So this is difference in perception about budget and in-house expertise. Remember, we had that question before. And so this is the yes response that's presented. So if you're adequate, is your budget adequate? The answer is 37% say generally it's adequate, or 63% say it's not adequate. If you're a high performer, that goes to 51%. So clearly a higher level of respondents saying that it's the yes response or it's adequate. And similarly, we see that in terms of the adequacy of in-house expertise, 41% versus 51%. Notice that these are very significant in a statistical sense. You know, the difference between these percentages, 51 versus 37%, or 51 versus 41%. Next slide. Has your organization experienced a cyber attack in the past 12 months? Well, the good news is, you know, if you look at the red bar, the high performers are saying yes, at not only, but 56%. Still very high, but the yes response overall is 67%. So there's clear value just in those percentage differences. And the no is just obviously moving in the opposite direction from 36% down to 22%. Next slide. Has your organization experienced exploits where malware evaded intrusion detection? Remember, we had this slide. If you were a high performer, the percentage on antivirus is 68% versus 82%. Huge level of significance there in that difference versus 59% versus 72% on intrusion detection. So clearly, again, these numbers are still high, but if you're a high performer based on the way we calculated that in our survey, you're basically doing better. You know, these percentages are a sign of improvement, which I think is very important. Next slide. This is perceptions about password security and ransomware. Again, you've seen some of these questions before, and now we've summarized it, comparing against the high performers. And the use of strong passwords and our biometrics is an essential part of an organization's security defense. If you're a high performer at 71% versus 62%. Negligent employees put our company at risk for ransomware attack. 61%. This is kind of flipperoonie, right? This is one where the overall is higher than the high performer, which is good news. My company believes it's too small to be a target of ransomware. 54% overall, only 38% for high performers. And then we are confident that our current antivirus software will protect our company from ransomware. And this is interesting, 48% for overall versus only 39% high performer. So again, the pattern of responses strongly suggest that if you're high performing, you're doing things better, especially in this whole idea of password security and so on. Next slide. Does your company have an incident response plan? It's kind of a weird result because we would expect yes to be 100%. Overall is only 60%, high performer 85%. It's a significant difference, but it's still too low. You would think this should be something every company does. Next slide. Does your company have a password policy for employees? The yes response should be very high, like 80, 90, even near 100%. The yes response overall is 40% versus 60%. So again, things could improve, but high performers are doing much better than the overall sample. Next slide. What are the most vulnerable endpoints or entry points to your company's network and or enterprise systems? We already saw the list before, but mobile devices, if you're a high performer at 62%, is higher than if you're an overall, which is hard to interpret that result, but I think it suggests that you have better tools to tell you where you have your risk, weakness, and vulnerability. And mobile devices would be one area where we're able to get more visibility into the problem. Laptop being number 2, notice that overall is 49% versus 39%. Cloud, 48 versus 42%, and you can see the rest. Next slide. The cost of compromises. Now, this was part of the survey. This is an extrapolated cost. Cost from disruption to normal operation. We calculate, and when you read the paper, we provide gruesome detail in terms of how we calculate this, but it's very important to our study. The high performer, the overall is 1.6 million overall for our sample versus high performer at just about a little over $1 million. So there's a big difference there, which is an ROI if you think about it. Cost from damage or theft of IT assets or infrastructure, 1.4 million versus again 1.1 million. The cost of attack from 3.83 million thousand to 294,000. So again, the cost of compromise is actually lower for the high performers because they're doing more and better things. But again, if someone asks me, does that mean security is free? The answer is no, because no matter what you do, it's going to cost dollars and real resources to achieve a strong security posture. Next slide. So again, there's a warning label. I have to share this with you. You know, we love doing research, and surveys are kind of our thing. We do these things very well. Quality control is important, all of that good stuff. But clearly there are inherent biases that you need to know about and deal with when they exist in your sample. The non-response bias, it simply means that the people who responded to the survey are different than the people who didn't. We could actually identify the non-response bias, but it could basically be a big issue. Sample and frame bias, that's where the sample is not representative of the underlying population. Again, it's a problem when it exists. There are things you can do to kind of reduce the risk, misinterpretation, and so on, but it always presents itself. And my favorite is the self-reported result. What that means is the survey taker, the respondent, on a beautiful day, you know, your sun's shining, you're in beautiful downtown Chicago or wherever, and basically, you know, you're feeling good, you do a Ponemon survey, and you strongly agree to everything, everything's great. Same person on a miserable, cloudy, snowy day, and mud, and, you know, all this stuff you have to deal with, and slush, and you basically go to work, and you get a Ponemon survey, and everything you strongly disagree. So these things are impossible to control completely, so you rely on the law of large numbers where they net itself out. But anyway, we talk about these caveats, but you know, despite this, we feel very confident that our research is done well and hopefully will be important to you. Let's go to our next slide. I think it's Darren. It's your turn, my friend. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ponemon. That was fantastic. So this is Darren Guccione. Again, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cybersecurity. So I'm going to cover just the key takeaways from the Ponemon study today. So first, SMBs are increasingly facing the same cybersecurity risks as larger organizations and enterprises. This is really important. because cyber risk does not discriminate. It's not industry specific. It's totally agnostic regarding the industry. It doesn't matter how large or small your company is. SMBs are at the same risk of attack as larger enterprise, and it's a very large market in terms of the total addressable market. So number two is that negligent employees and contractors continue being the #1 root cause of data breaches, and half of all SMBs do not know how to protect their companies, which is a major issue. The importance of password management and protection has increased significantly. Next, we know that passwords are the keys to the kingdom. So it all starts with password security, and passwords being stolen or compromised as a result of employees using weak passwords or the same password on multiple websites, applications, and systems are the top 2 password-related pain points at SMBs. Next is a lack of visibility into the employee password practices, which is increasing the likelihood of attacks involving passwords. So when we talk about password practices, we're not just talking about the practices on one device, we're talking about this impact on every person in the organization across all of their devices, whether it's a smartphone, tablet, or computer. It's important that we talk about this in a pervasive stance. Next is that human memory and spreadsheets, surprisingly, are mostly used to remember passwords, which is a problem because you always want to use a high-strength random password and unique password across every website, application, and system that you have. And the way to do that is through a password management system. So we believe that password security is the Trojan horse that can harm your business, and we've shown that. And as a result of weak password security being the Trojan horse, we know that over 80% of all cyber breaches are a result of either weak passwords or poor password management practices in an organization. And we couple that as password security. Because we know that the 80% is true and that the majority of all data breaches start with weak password security, we can say that cybersecurity starts with password security. So if you have a cybersecurity posture or a plan at your organization, it doesn't matter how large or small your organization is, you must start with password security. You have to put a cloak of armor and internal controls around your passwords. Implementing a password management solution is absolutely critical for SMBs, and we've shown that in the study today. Number one, it reduces the risk of a data breach by up to 80%. You can bolster security and privacy across the entire organization. That includes, again, every mobile device and computer across all of your employees. And at the same time, what's beautiful about these applications is that you can improve employee productivity. So that includes access to websites and systems and applications much faster because you're not fumbling around trying to remember passwords or referencing notes or lists or other means to engage and transact online. You can enforce compliance standards, so when it comes to internal control procedures, the technology follows the internal control procedures, again, putting that cloak of armor around your password security and then governing that across the entire organization with a very high degree of visibility. Next are the key factors that SMBs should consider when selecting a password management solution. So first, you want to make sure that you follow a security architecture that we call zero knowledge. And what zero knowledge means is that the end user or the employee is always in complete control and has knowledge of their master password and the encryption key that's used to decrypt and encrypt their information when it comes to vaulting passwords and accessing those passwords on all of their devices. So zero knowledge security architecture is of paramount importance, which means that no one other than that person has access to and can view that information stored in their vault. Next would be the ability to share and revoke credentials, and you want to make sure that sharing always occurs with full end-to-end encryption from one vault to the other vault. So no public sharing, no leakage, of course, of credential, and the ability to revoke information and credential and access with an employee or a team or a group or a division. you should have that type of granular control when it comes to password management. Next would be role-based access controls, again, related to specific individuals. For example, you may have different access controls and roles for an engineering manager or a sysadmin versus someone in finance, such as a CFO. So you can granularly control that as well. And then the system should be accessible from any platform and device. So the solutions that we believe are the best are accessible on every type of operating system, smartphone, tablet, and computer, and as well as the web browser. So it should be platform and OS agnostic to give you full flexibility for both online access and offline access as well. Two-factor authentication is of paramount importance because that always mitigates the risk of a remote data breach. So 2FA is very, very important. And a good password management solution like Keeper should support a library of different methods. So maybe your organization uses Google Authenticator or RSA Secure ID or Duo Security or a litany. We cover the main and most popular 2FA library methods. Next would be rapid provisioning and integration with Active Directory or LDAP or single sign-on solutions. So you should make sure that the password management solution integrates with these types of systems and solutions, and Keeper does that as well. Next would be certs and compliance. So Keeper is SOC certified, HIPAA compliant, DPA compliant for Europe, as well as FINRA for financial services, and then government certification for GSA and SAM. So certs are very, very important. So next is how we safeguard your business with the use of Keeper. And Keeper is the leading cybersecurity software for protecting businesses and client information. When we say leading, we have over 15 million individual users on the platform. We've had over 1 million downloads of the software since inception. Keeper was the first product to be installed on a preloaded basis on smartphones with carriers like AT&T and América Móvil for Latin America and Orange Telecom in Europe. And what the product allows you to do is you can organize and access all of your passwords and private information like metadata, even files, photos, and video files can all go in this ubiquitous Keeper vault that runs on your smartphone, your mobile devices, your computers. It runs on everything. It allows you to sync all of your files that are stored in the vault across all your devices. You can share records with other Keeper users with vault-to-vault and full end-to-end encryption. You can create random high-strength passwords according to the policies that you set up for your organization, so it's very flexible. You can attach files, which of course are always encrypted both at rest and in transit. And we cover secure digital file storage, 24/7, 365 support. Functionally, again, you can autofill passwords across mobile sites and applications as well as desktop, so it's very flexible. And we have a patent on that. It's called Keeper Fill. And then in terms of biometric authentication, we cover things like Face ID and Touch ID for fingerprint. So if your device supports biometrics, Keeper does as well. We cover 256-bit AES encryption, as well as a litany of very high layered encryption. And we have a full security disclosure on our website at keepersecurity.com/security. So we're very transparent about how we protect and safeguard client information. So next, I'll cover the essential features to protect your business. So some of the benefits here is that you can provision private vaults for each employee and member of your team and across the entire organization. You can distribute and have access to shared folders and subfolders for taxonomy and organization. It's very helpful. And then you're supported by an admin console. So the admin console would be like the mission control panel for the IT admin or sysadmin or CISO to provision, manage, and deploy Keeper across the entire organization and have complete visibility and control over the password hygiene and distribution of passwords across the entire ecosystem. So it's a very powerful application. Again, you have role-based access, you have version control and record history, which is very flexible in terms of data retention. And it gives you a security audit score and reporting, which is great because When we ask most SMBs today if they know, for example, how many employees across their organization are using weak passwords on multiple websites or systems, or if they know how many employees are reusing passwords on multiple websites and systems that could expose them to a data breach, most of the time, an SMB will not know the answer to that. And it's really important, because cybersecurity starts with password security, for an SMB to have complete visibility and knowledge of the cybersecurity strength and the password security audit score across the organization. So Keeper allows you to have that instant visibility across all of those devices. This is a testimonial, just a quote from one of our customers, CIO of a top financial services company. We don't typically disclose the names of our customers, but we have thousands of business customers that use our product. And he said that Keeper is the most cost-effective tool for protecting our business against hackers. It also made our team more productive. They rave about how great this product is. And this is really important, because it's very rare when you have a security solution in the SMB or the enterprise that employees actually love using. And we've been able to design a product and create something special where you can unify both convenience and security into a single solution. So there are some bullet points here about how SMBs can protect against cyber threats. Number one, you can implement password policies for all employees, and this is of paramount importance. Number two, you should allocate adequate budgets and in-house expertise for cybersecurity. You know, you'd be really surprised, you know, how you can apply Keeper to your organization for a nominal amount of money, and the value that it creates is massive. So what I'm trying to say is that the cost to value spread on some of the cybersecurity solutions that are in the market today are really beneficial. And even if you're, you know, a smaller organization and you don't have a formal IT budget, it's okay, because this can be viewed as a period expense. I'm a CPA, so I can say that, but it's a period expense. You just put on a credit card, it's amortized however you want, and it's very flexible in terms of pricing and coverage. So we would urge you to take a look at that. Number three, you can enforce strong passwords and biometrics. Next, you can reinforce security across all devices that employees use, which is really important. And lastly, you should prepare an incident response plan. So we all know that the 4 buckets of cybersecurity are prevention, detection, remediation, and response. And at the end of the day, if there is a breach for whatever reason, you want to make sure that you have an incident response plan. And not just for a breach, but also if you recognize that there's an internal control violation inside the business, you should know exactly how you're supposed to take action and remediate that issue. So now I'm going to open things up for Q&A, and I did see some questions come through, so I'm going to take a look at this. So the first question was, in terms of gross revenue, this is for Dr. Ponemon, what was the definition of an SMB? So what delineated an SMB from a larger enterprise? So Dr. Ponemon, I'm not sure if you're on mute. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you just very well. I apologize. I had the mute button on.
Okay.
No, so we basically define SMB by head count, and it would be full-time equivalent head count. And in this study would be a range of about 100 to about 1,000 full-time equivalent individuals or employees. I know that number does vary quite a bit. Like, for example, if we did our study in Australia, 500-person company is actually very large, you know, relative to other organizations. But in the U.S. and U.K., basically the 1,000 is kind of the upper limit before it becomes an enterprise-sized organization. Again, that's the rule of thumb that we've been following.
Okay. The next question was, were the most vulnerable endpoints identified based on data or individual belief by the individual answering the question? So I believe in our data, we showed that mobile devices were the main endpoint identified. Was that based on the data or individual belief by the person answering the question.
Great, great. The survey question asked is more of a yes/no response, but we know that even if they say yes, it might be like a likelihood. In other words, they're not 100% sure it's yes, it's trending to yes. And that's, again, one of the issues about surveys. You know, it would be nice to kind of get into the mind of the individual, but we rely on their projection and a little bit of conjecture at some point. But again, the number that we would like to use, and we assume is, if not absolutely the number, but it could be an approximate, would be kind of like a yes response or a no response versus a likelihood that something could happen, but it's not, you're not stating it at the 100% level. And again, there's a science, there's an art to surveys, and kind of getting people to give you a yes/no response. Sometimes it's difficult, so we use other methods to kind of tease out what the true number might look like.
Okay, great. And on slide 19, there was a gentleman who asked, are smartphones included in the mobile devices category? And he recognized that smartphones were listed separately from mobile devices, quote unquote.
Right, so there's overlap to that, obviously. And so a smartphone is a mobile device, but there are mobile devices that are not smartphones that might be included in that number. But again, it's a little bit overlapping. We do that deliberately because we want to have an exhaustive response. So sometimes things like, what's the difference between a mobile device and a smartphone? You know, a smartphone is one type of mobile device. There are many types of mobile devices that would be included in that category. But good question. Thank you.
Okay, the next question was, what are the most common things that negligent employees are doing? Is this consistent across all SMBs, including high performers? I can answer that if you like.
That'd be great. Thank you. I have to hear your perspective.
So this one is, it's the same thing that we've seen for the past 3 years as we conduct the study, is using weak passwords, using the same password on multiple websites, applications, and systems, and using really mundane approaches to writing passwords down or storing them in an Excel worksheet or on sticky notes or a sheet of paper or in a Word document, for example, in plain text format. We've been seeing the same things over and over again, and it's just a result of, you know, either bad habits or not knowing that really good technology exists to handle these things in a much better way that actually saves you time and, of course, makes you far more secure. So that's the response there. And the last question was, it is interesting that slide 14 indicates phishing / social engineering / web-based attacks, malware, are the top attacks, but slide 40 doesn't show email filtering or website filtering as an essential technology. We know the attacks and still continue to not spend money in the right place to stop the most prevalent attacks that result in data loss. So I'm trying to decipher what this means, but we do know that one of the most common approaches in terms of hacking, even at the most entry level, is a phishing attack. It's the easiest way, and it's really about hacking 101. If there was a course on hacking, that would probably be the course. It's the easiest way to aggregate and harvest login credentials. Outside of a direct breach of a database, this one comes in through email or social engineering or social phishing to harvest, you know, login credentials for a person's digital life. So that's what we see.
Beautiful.
Okay, next question. For the finding of negligent employee or contractor being the root cause of breaches, is there or will there be a drill down that delineates between contractor and employee? I think that one's...
The answer to, that is a really good question. I think when we do the study again, that is an issue that we want to study in greater detail, because my guess is that a contractor, even though they might be fulfilling the same job or role as a full-time employee, there are differences. So it's a really good point, and I think we should do a deeper dive to find out whether there are significant differences. Remember, in our sample, in terms of where these people reside, and what their position level is. The contractor category is relatively small, so at this stage it might be, a little bit of conjecture. But we should probably look at that and see if there are differences, because I think that would be a very interesting variable. So good, really appreciate that the question.
Okay, and I think that's about it. I mean, it's yep, we're on time. So thank you, everyone. This was really great. And Dr. Ponemon, thank you again.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for their interest in the research. It's great.
Yep, and for anyone who requests a video of this presentation, we'll be happy to send that to you. Yep, and everyone who did register is going to get it as well. So thank you again, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.